This is an Apostrophe podcast production.
You're Under the Influence with Terry O'Reilly.
Hey, Max, congratulations on the book. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks for reading it. It's, as a musician, you send a friend a song and it just requires them 3 minutes to listen to it. But when you're writing a book, it's a much bigger ask. So
it is a bigger ask, yeah. I read it cover to cover and loved it.
Oh, thank you.
Your book is about creativity, creative work. Tell me what sparked the idea to turn your thoughts on that subject into a book.
Well, over the years, people have asked, you should write a book because people like rock and roll autobiographies. People like the stories of being on tour and sex, drugs, rock and roll, all that stuff. I don't particularly like those kinds of books. I know we share a love of the Beatles. I'm into Beatles history, but beyond Beatles history, I don't know if I care that much about rock and roll lore. I just don't. This is not
interesting.
Yeah, but I do love talking about the nuts and bolts of the job. So whenever the conversation turns to like, oh, how did the band get together? Or how do you guys think about money? Or how did you guys start playing shows? How did you get better at playing shows? Like those are questions that I love to talk about. And people's eyes always light up more than I expect when I really get into the day-to-day of what my life looks like. And so that's where I started. I said, if I could just have a bunch of essays about the nature of my day-to-day life and things I've learned along the way, then that might be a place to start the book.
Interesting. Were you ever wary of analyzing your creative process, that by dissecting it, you might alter the magic?
No, because I'm always analyzing it happily. And I don't really believe in magic. See, I even talk about that in the book where, people, when they think about how were those great songs written, or how did you pull this thing off? And they think about Paul McCartney, how did you write Yesterday? It's like, well, it came to me in a dream. I'm like, well, that's not particularly helpful, if you were to ask Paul McCartney, how did you actually, think of that chord change or what inspired that song? If you actually asked him, he'd go, well, I was listening to Brian Wilson and Brian Wilson wrote God Only Knows. And he did this really clever thing and I tried to rip that off. That's what the answer actually would be. So I'm constantly analyzing what is working and what is feeling good and what's not feeling good anymore. And maybe something that was working in the past is gone stale. And I get into that in the songwriting chapter. There was the first 3 records with the band was written like an indie rock band, where it's just the 5 of us in a room figuring out the songs together. But, we'd done that for 8 years. And after 8 years of doing the same thing, you kind of got to figure out, okay, are we going to do this for the rest of our lives, or can we reinvent ourselves in some way? And I realized maybe if we had a voice outside the band that helped reimagine what songwriting could look like, that might be a good skill to learn and to acquire, and then to bring back to the fold, to bring back to the band. And I get into that in one of the chapters, how I made this trip to LA, and in one day with one producer, I've only met that one day, his name is John Fields, we wrote a song, My Heart So Is Yours, or we started it. And I learned oh, you know what? I don't have to sing in a vocal booth. Terry, I don't know if you know this, but you don't always have to do the vocals in a vocal booth. Bono, when he sings right there in the control room with his bandmates hanging around, with the monitors blasting back out at him. And I wouldn't have known that if not for John Fields. I suppose if I had read a YouTube biography, I would have known that.
Exactly, yeah.
Maybe I should read more rock and roll biographies. But, so a big part of the book is it's how do you evolve? How do you kind of analyze where you're at and get better?
It's interesting that you bring up the fact that you've had these blind date writing sessions or working with a brand new producer. In my business, in my field of work, I spent my career in advertising agencies, and you were always paired with somebody. So a writer with an art director. So I was a writer paired with an art director, and you develop a relationship. And from that relationship, you would create stuff. The sparks would fly. If you shared the same sense of humor, even though you were different in other aspects, it would work. But whenever I was paired with somebody new, let's say my art director was ill or on holiday, and then I get paired with somebody, it was really hard, I found, to get the sparks of creativity happening because there was no relationship there. So you say that you can walk into a room and work with somebody new and really have a great experience. So explain that to me, how you get over that the non-relationship aspect of that?
Oh, good question. Well, I mean, it doesn't always go as smoothly. And of course, there's like a comfort, to working with people that you're very familiar with. And I do think it requires, in a songwriting session, you to really let your guard down and be vulnerable and think about, am I really going to say the thing that's bothering me today?
Hard
that might
to do with a new person, though.
It is hard to do with a new person. And I think maybe that's one of like my skills, is that I'm just able to let my guard down a little bit and be vulnerable. But that said, I think it's up to everybody who's working on a team to bring back new information to the group, because I do really love group work, and I want all my partners to go out there having conversations and learning from other people, because then otherwise we just all become predictable. Like, I talk about our manager Ash in the book, and she's a huge creative partner in my life, and I love when she says, "Oh, I was talking to so and so, and they told me this thing, and it made me think about how we can market the band a little differently now." Or I want her to be consuming information that's not just my stupid voice all the time. And then the same thing goes with the band. Like, I want everybody that I'm working with to do continuing education. And it's so funny because my dad, I talk about this in the book, my dad is a social worker, but he puts on these conferences, continuing education conferences for social workers, and mental health professionals. And it's a big part of his life is just continuing to learn. And so I think it's like, it makes the group stronger if we're just collecting more information from outside of the group.
George St. Pierre, my favorite UFC fighter, has this great line that he calls it a white belt mentality, Max. That even though he is a 4th degree black belt, he has a white belt mentality, meaning he's always willing to learn.
Oh, I love that. I'm going to steal that.
What's your writing process when it came to the book? Do you like to write alone in the quiet? Do you like to write somewhere busy? Do you like mornings? Do you like evenings? What was your process?
I really like working in the morning at a coffee shop. I like the hustle and bustle. I like that it provides just a little bit of distraction. I think that stimuli does a lot for me. I know there's some writers that need to be in their own apartment or in their own, writing space in the woods. I hate that. I've always kind of hated that stuff. And I like to be able to get up and, when I'm ready to be done, be in the middle of a neighborhood and go for a walk. So I'd say, again, like, what business do I have writing a book? It's my first book. I feel very much like an amateur. But the way I did it, I can say, is I would work on an essay. I'd get to 1,500, 2,000 words. And that would, take me a few hours, and it would be sloppy and it would be bad, but I'd enjoy it. The flow state and the excitement of getting new ideas down on paper was very fun for me. And then I'd call Ash. I say, Ash, let's go for a walk. And I just read her a bit of what I had. And in reading out loud, I could pretty quickly identify what parts were meandering, what parts were funny, what parts seemed redundant, and I can also get real-time reaction from Ash. And she and also she's so creative. She would go, "Oh, you forgot to mention this other part of the thing that happened that day," or So for me, and again, everybody is different, and not everybody needs an audience immediately in the way that I need an audience or like an audience. But having feedback quickly gave me a lot of momentum, and I think momentum is so important in a creative project. And people can find momentum in different ways. You don't have to do it the way I did it, but for me, that ongoing conversation just spurned more work.
Let's talk about the flow state you mentioned, because I get into that as a writer too. When I'm writing my show, I'll get into that slipstream, that flow state, and time will disappear. Like, I'll look up at the clock and I'll have been at it for 5 hours and it feels like 90 minutes. But that flow state is so important to creativity, isn't it?
Oh, it's so good. It's much different than editing. Editing requires a different kind of patience. But yeah, I think if you've been ruminating on an idea for a long time, and in this case, like my entire life, just these ideas that consume me every day, more comes out of you than you think. And also by writing, you learn about yourself, right? That's there's nothing like it. The experience of educating yourself as you write down your own ideas, and you go, "Oh, that's actually kind of what I think." It's like trying to articulate it just right.
To see it articulated, yeah.
Yeah. But I think, for me, because the book is kind of a collection of essays, it's sort of in chronological order. I did sit down with a theme in mind, and a lot of each chapter revolves around just a story I wanted to tell. And if you're reading just for the story, hopefully it's just an entertaining story. But if you're reading closely, there's a lesson in there. And also, I hope you see yourself in the story, in some way. And, I think, for instance, like in a chapter about my dad, I talk about his work as a social worker, and then he kind of started his own business doing these continuing education conferences. And the lesson there is, it's like, what exists in your family that you might be able to take from? And it doesn't mean that your dad had to be an entrepreneur. It just, is there something about your dad's work ethic or his lack of work ethic that inspired you? It's like, I think we're shaped, we're shaped by our families, we're shaped by our friends, we're shaped by our communities. And that's what a lot of the book is about, is just like kind of, taking from all those things around us.
And it's also unique. You were saying too in the book that two different writers can tackle the same subject and it'll never be the same piece of creativity.
Yeah. I got that piece of advice from listening to a podcast with Malcolm Gladwell and Rick Rubin, two of the giants of their respective fields. And, Gladwell said, I was kind of getting insecure that I'm not as good of a journalist as Michael Lewis. And then Rick Rubin corrected him and said, no, it's not about being as good as somebody else. It's just about being the best version of yourself, which is simple advice, but very true.
You mentioned Stephen King's book on writing, which is one of my favorite books on this subject. What did you take away from King's book? What was it about that book that stuck with you?
Well, I mentioned this in my book, is he's so matter of fact about it. I think a goal for my book is to demystify creativity and the arts and just understand that it's just, it starts with the curiosity to do it and to learn more. And then it's just the act of doing it. And Stephen King says, if you just try to get down, 1,500, 2,000 words a day, and you do that for 4 months, you got a book.
You got a book.
How complicated is it?
Yeah, I know.
And it's true. It's like, because people go, how did you write a book? How did you possibly do it? It's like, it's way harder than writing a book to me? Assembling IKEA furniture. I couldn't, that's so much harder. I'm not kidding. I couldn't do one piece of IKEA furniture, but I couldn't. But writing a book, that's actually kind of a nice time.
I have a book coming out in the fall, and my book contract said I had to deliver 80,000 words. So literally what I did was figured out how many words per week I had to generate to meet that deadline. And it was really the discipline of creative.
Totally.
Right? It takes a lot of discipline. Tell me about the need to find creative co-conspirators. And you touched on that already today, but why is that so important? Because a lot of creativity is a solo act.
But I do think of creativity like a team sport. My first love is sports. I played on team sports. I had no interest in solo sports like swimming or running. Those things would have stressed me out. But being part of a team always made me feel so alive, right? Like basketball, baseball, volleyball, those were the sports I played the most. But I, played ball hockey. I played flag football. And what I love about sports is that there's a different role for each player on the team. There's on a basketball court, there's the guy who brings up the ball, there's the guy responsible for rebounding, there's the guy responsible for setting a pick, there's the guy responsible for like defending the other team's best player. And I love that because that's sort of like what being in a band is. It's like not everybody can be the high scorer, not everybody can be the singer. But not everybody wants to be that. And that's not everybody's talent. Some people's talent is drumming. Some people's talent is rebounding. Some people are taller. So some people, I don't know. It's, I think it's, creativity can be a team sport. And that's why I really like it. And that's why finding co-conspirators is so satisfying to me. Also, here's the other thing is I know what I'm bad at, which is most things. I truly I can't edit anything in Pro Tools. I'm a terrible guitar player. I can't drum. But I have ideas. And there's some people who just really want to be great at executing their part and want to talk about ideas, but sometimes might not know where to begin. And then that's where my job is to come in and go, what if we did this? And then, I don't know. I think there's so much pleasure to be found in working with people who have skills that you don't. And the only way you build an enterprise that is a band, which is turned into a big apparatus, right? It's not just us in a studio recording songs. It's us making merch. It's us going on tour, selling tickets. It's us designing what the production's going to look like. It's all of these things. You need to be able to communicate with people and value what they do.
Because everybody has a superpower, right, Max? Mm-hmm. I'm a big believer in that. And you say in the book, and you're touching on this now, and this is important, I think, you have to learn to delight in other people's skills. Mm-hmm. Like you have to welcome that. You can't be offended by it or made insecure by it. You have to actually welcome that.
Mm-hmm. I think I take extra delight in other people's skills because they often feel so foreign to me that right. Someone would have the patience to figure something out, or someone has the ability. When I see Anthony play at the piano in our band, I go, oh my God, the way his fingers move. It's like, it's breathtaking. It's really breathtaking. And I just think, oh God, he's been practicing since he was 5 years old. And if he can't figure out a lick, he takes the time to figure out the lick. And he can also do things with both of his hands. Like, on stage, he's playing one keyboard with his left hand, another keyboard with his other. Wow. He's triggering sounds. And I go, oh my God, how does he possibly do that? And it's funny because people might compliment me on something I do on stage. And I go, oh, that's just whatever I happen to be able to know how to do. I'm not impressed with that at all. It's just what I happen to be able to know and care about. But that's not interesting to me. What's interesting to me is like what other people have figured out how to do.
And he probably says the same thing about you. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about being an entrepreneur, because being in a band is a business. You're running a business. When you are the boss, and you touch on this in your book, you do not have a boss telling you how hard to work or when to work. So you have to be disciplined and you have to provide that drive yourself. Talk to me about that.
There's a few parts to it. One, I really enjoy the job. It gives me purpose, right? Every day I wake up and I have a to-do list and things I need to figure out. And right now I'm in the middle of a bunch of items on my to-do list. It's Monday morning. It's sunny outside. I went for a walk with Ash. There's stuff to do today, which is great. Like I did some writing in the morning. I'm doing another podcast later. And I'm going to be calling the band. We got to work over some mixes. So it's all provides purpose. I think the other thing is that I recognize how precious the job is and how unique it is and how lucky we are that we get to only work this job. Because most creatives, talented creatives, like awesomely talented creatives, often have to work their own 9-to-5 job just to make rent. And
they have a side hustle. Yeah.
And that's 99% of people in the creative fields, and that is just like a reality of the world that we live in. So understanding that, I also operate slightly in a place of fear where I go, I can never go back. I don't want to go back because I just appreciate what I have so deeply that like it takes real work to hold on to it. Because if you don't, if you're not precious about it, if you don't recognize how special it is that you have this job that pays the bills, it could go away. So, I think we work in service of making sure that we can make the next record, that we can go on the next tour, that we can continue the fun that we have. And that's one of the reasons why we work so hard.
I found that was really one of the main themes of your book, and even the title, Try Hard, that success is really built brick by brick, isn't it? It's a ton of hard work.
It really is. Our first record came out in 2008, and I think about our peer group from that time, who are some of the like most amazing songwriters that I know, some of the most amazing performers that I know, some of the most amazing musicians that I know. But many aren't doing that job anymore. They've had to transition into something else, and it's not because they're not amazing. They are. But I think the longevity comes with keeping that spark alive, and you have to figure out how to regenerate that spark every day, because the second you start resenting the job or resenting your colleagues, that's when the work slows down, because you don't want to. You have more creative conversations when you're getting along with people that you're working alongside. The second you look at your phone and go, oh, do I want to call that person? Whether that's a bandmate or whether that's your label, or it's just the second that starts to happen, the work slows down. You lose that momentum. And I think I mentioned this earlier, you can't lose the momentum. You have to keep that energy alive within you in your projects.
And you said also on that subject that hard work equals luck. I think it was that famous golfer, Gary Player, maybe, that said, the harder I practice, the luckier I get. Because hard work does then also beget luck, right?
But I do think that when people ask us about, what are the lucky moments that you had, and I can talk about it. There's a chapter in the book where in 2007 we played North by Northeast, the music festival in Toronto, and we played at Yonge and Dundas Square, a town square that has seen crowds of 15,000 people. We played for 25 people.
Right.
And my grandmother was there, the first and last show she ever saw. She sat on her walker. And someone happened to walk by that day. His name's Sean Creamer. He was a little bit hungover. He liked what he heard from the back of the square. He purchased 6 EPs that we had just made. And making that EP was hard. It's like we were in the middle of classes. We were driving to Scarborough every night, and then getting home and writing an essay to hand in the next day at McMaster University. And we paid with it with our own money. We sold 6 copies. And I remember at that end of the afternoon, I was like, oh my God, we sold some EPs. That's fantastic. Turns out Sean Creamer was the owner and operator of this bar, the Dakota Tavern, which is in Toronto's West End, which is a real music hangout. It just actually closed down, RIP. But he took it upon himself just to give our EP to different managers. And it ended up in the hands of Joel at Dynalone Records. And Joel liked what he heard. And then Joel signed us. And so it's like, for us getting to that point at Yonge and Dundas Square took 3 years of working as a band, meeting at McMaster, practicing, rehearsing. What are we going to wear at that show? How are we going to get to the show? Sometimes we take the Go Bus or the Greyhound to get to other cities to make the gig. So it took a lot of work, but then we got very lucky that Sean was walking by that day.
That's right. And that luck wouldn't have happened without all that hard work.
Mm-hmm.
You say you learned several important lessons watching Bruce Springsteen, which I thought was very interesting. Give me a sense of what a couple of those lessons were. So
yeah, I went to the show at the Sky Dome in 2012, Rogers Center in downtown Toronto, and I could go on. This could be a 3-hour conversation, but I'll try to keep it short. He walked on stage to take me out to the ball game. The organ player was playing, and I go, "Oh, that's such a funny, thoughtful little detail." He's in a baseball stadium. He's walking onto like a kind of a song that has a bit of a chuckle and a wink to the crowd. So he gets on stage, and immediately the band kicks off. There's no tuning your instruments and letting the buzz die off. And it's funny because I've been to so many club shows over the years with some of my favorite bands, and they walk on the stage. And one of my favorite moments of any concert is when the band walks on the stage. I always never want to miss the first song because I just love that feeling. There's no feeling like it when a band walks on the stage. And then I've seen so many shows though where the band walks on the stage and then proceeds to tune their instruments for the first 45 seconds.
So true.
And it's brutal. And it's such a small detail that really means a lot to me. And don't mess it up. Don't mess it up for the crowd. Don't mess it up for yourself. So anyway, seeing Springsteen walk onto a thoughtful song and then launching right into him. Okay, that's it. Okay, I took that note. Then he looked up at the crowd. He said, "How's it going up there?" And I remember thinking, because I've seen Springsteen up in the because I was close to that show, but I've seen him when I've been up in the cheap seats, and I always go, "Oh, he's looking at us. He's thinking about us." I'm like, "Okay, I'm gonna clock that." Okay, I'm gonna clock that. Then he was looking out. He was actually looking in the crowd and looking for signs, and because people bring these homemade signs, and he goes, "Oh, maybe we should play that one." And the band is such a well-oiled machine that he pulls the sign up from the crowd towards the end of one song, and then on a dime, they just launch into the next one. And that comes with the band being really prepared. But all of these things are very simple. None of it's rocket science, but it made the shows feel amazing. And anybody can make that show if you're prepared, And so again, not rocket science, but it's just about being prepared and these little gestures that show to the audience that you care. And then it feels like magic. And then the whole thing feels like magic. So that was a masterclass for me in what any band can do. And that's what I tell young bands. I'm like, when you walk on stage, just have your instruments tuned up and go. That's a small thing that separates good bands from great bands.
Let's talk about the need to be brave. I remember I saw a film a number of years ago, and the basic premise, Max, was you just have to be brave for 5 minutes. And you talk about being brave enough one day to pick up the phone and call the coach of the Raptors, Nick Nurse, which turned into a wonderful thing down the road. So talk about the importance of being brave for 5 minutes.
Yeah. Well, I'll add to that. It's also the importance of having the memory of a goldfish because I happen to have a bad memory, and people remind me of things all the time that didn't necessarily work out as I planned. I'm like, oh yeah, that didn't work out. And I think if I had a better memory, I'd probably harbor those bad feelings more deeply.
Right.
So I just happen to be born that way, and I'm grateful for it. But, I think we spend a lot of time in our heads thinking about how other people might react to an idea, and I think so often we stop ourselves from even asking a question because we worry about how somebody might receive it. If someone might think we're lame, if someone might think it's a stupid question, if somebody thinks we're being a pest or a tryhard. But what I've learned over the years is that, this is obvious, but it's like, it doesn't hurt to ask. People aren't thinking about you in the way that you think they're thinking about you, and I talk about working with this producer on our third record, Tony Hoffer. Tony Hoffer is this like LA producer. He worked on all these great indie rock records. He worked with like Beck and M83 and so many, the Thrills, this Irish band that I love. He's worked with so many great artists, and we emailed him, and we never heard back from him. And we said, okay, I guess Tony Hoffer thinks we suck. I guess we're, below his level of musician that he wants to work with. And then a year later, we got a DM from Tony on MySpace saying, hey, I really like what you guys are doing. I saw this live session you did. What are you guys working on? And we're like, what the hell is going on? We tried to reach out to you. Turns out the email address on his website was just a dated email address. It wasn't in commission. So anyway, it just goes to show that we had built up this idea of Tony Hoffer and who he was and what he thought of us because he never got back to us. And it turns out none of it was true. And that happens to be the case so often, I found. So I think, summoning the courage to be brave for 5 minutes is always a good idea.
Briefly, tell me about the story about knocking at the door and how that evolved into this amazing opportunity for you.
So the song started from a very heartfelt place. We were touring in America, January 2017. We started the tour in DC. So it was like around Trump 1's inauguration. And we were in Philadelphia the next day when the Women's March happened. And it was the previous few months had been very depressing. Oh my God, like Donald Trump's gonna be the president of America. Like, what world are we living in? But then we were in America and there's all these great protests happening, like peaceful protests. And I was reminded, I was like, when people come together, you realize you have a few more friends than you might realize, or a few more like-minded people than you realize. We finished the tour. We were promoting Morning Report that had just come out a few months before. And Tim, our drummer, sent a bunch of beats for me to just listen to. And one of them was really interesting. One was a little different. It was a sort of militaristic kind of snare beat. And I started the beginnings of knocking at the door. I wrote it on my piano and I played Tim's drum beat coming out of my laptop. So then I just like made a little voice note. It was very simple. A few weeks after that, we had heard through the grapevine that the Blue Jays and the Toronto and Budweiser were looking for a new song to kick off their season. That was starting in March, and starting in early April. We got the email in March, and we pitched a bunch of songs that had come out on Morning Report. Nothing. They said nothing was a fit, and then I said, just for fun, let's send them this demo of knocking at the door. It was like a 90-second demo. And they loved it. And they said, let's go for lunch. And then they showed us at the lunch, Andrew Oosterhuis, who's the head of marketing at Budweiser, he showed us the spot set to the demo of the song. And I said, Andrew, this is not even a real song yet. This is just a 90-second song. He said, no, this is great. We were like, well, when do you need the finished song by? He goes, well, the commercial comes out in 3 weeks. And so we left the lunch. I called the band. I said, guys, we're going into the studio tomorrow. And in the next 3 days, we recorded Knocking at the Door, which is sort of a complex song. There's all sorts of interesting, unusual sections. It's not like a cut and paste job at all. And we made an official music video at the end of March, and then the song came out a few days ahead of the commercial. And that song ended up, being number one for 14 weeks in Canada. We went to the Olympics on the back of that song. We went to the NHL awards on the back of that song. It's been used in countless places over the years. And it happened kind of because there was a deadline. It was just,
right.
It was like, that song wouldn't have seen the light of day for another year and a half if it weren't for us sort of keeping our ears to the ground and our eyes peeled on like what opportunities were out there. So it was an interesting combination of like a creative spark, a deadline, a conversation, and there you have it.
Leonard Bernstein had that great line I always remembered. He said, when he's talking about creativity, he goes, what you need are two things, a really great idea and not enough time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Because a deadline it's like, I always look at that, Max, like playoff hockey. There's an intensity to playoff hockey that you don't see generally during this season. And it's because there's this looming deadline, right?
Yeah.
There's this looming sudden death aspect to it that fuels the creativity.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the concept of gradual improvement, which you talk about in your book. And that creativity is really about iteration.
Yeah, I mean, I think gradual improvement comes with like being engaged every day and reflecting on what's working, what's not working, what feels right for the moment. And I think specifically when we go on tour, you know, we're rehearsed for the show, and we have a sense of what the show ought to feel like when we go to each town. But the work doesn't stop after, you know, the first show. After the first show, we're taking notes. Okay, did that part of the set list work? What song should we swap out? Was that transition okay? Should we add another cover because we're playing in Kingston tonight? Oh, maybe we should do a hip song in Kingston. You know, it's an ongoing conversation. No, did I like the way I looked that night? Maybe I'll buy another T-shirt for the next show. You know, it's an ongoing reflection of what feels right, what feels exciting. And what is asking for more, and I think and those conversations make touring fun. Because if it was just the same thing every day, it would be boring. And, you know, I talk about this, about meeting Shania Twain. And, you know, she works on her outfits with her seamstress for every night of the tour. She wants to have a different outfit for every night of the tour. She keeps it spontaneous, you know, and she did 80 dates. And every show, she wanted a different outfit for each audience. So and that was her gesture to the audience that you're special to me. This date will be different than the rest. And I tell another story about being on tour with the Tragically Hip and Gord Downey telling me a story about driving around Prince Edward County with his son and showing him The Who and the power of The Who and how you have to listen to The Who at 11, you know, to really feel it. And I was so charmed by the story. And then later that night on stage, he starts telling that story again as the band is playing underneath him. And I was like, oh, he was just sort of workshopping a bit on me. So, you know, so I think gradual improvement comes with, again, being immersed in it, really living and breathing the work and figuring out, okay, how do I make today feel good?
When you put yourself out there like you do, like I do, even as a CBC host, it inevitably means you're going to get comments from the public. And with social media, there's a lot of trolling that happens. And I know that aspect keeps a lot of creative people away or stops them from putting themselves out there because they're afraid of dealing with that. How do you deal with the negative internet feedback that is inevitable to anybody who puts themselves out there?
Well, I mean, one strategy is just not be online as much and not to get, you know, too involved in the online comment section to begin with. I also have I have a lot of friends that aren't in my line of work. So being around them always grounds things in a really healthy way because they could kind of care less about whatever minor spat might be happening in your own industry. So I think there's a healthy balance to be had there. And I think when it comes to the art itself, our booking agent Jack Ross told me something one time where he said, you know, some bands play for the band standing side stage and some bands play for the crowd in front of them. And he said, I've seen so many bands over the year just really care about the other bands that were standing side stage. And they didn't really care that much about the audience. They were worried about what their peers thought of them. And he's like, and Max, your band's always played for the crowd. Like your band has cared about what the crowd feels and what the crowd wants and what the crowd needs. And you're not so concerned about, like, you know, whoever might be standing side stage. So I think that's such a good lesson is to play for the crowd and not and not for anybody else.
You know, one lesson that we've learned on our radio show, which was an epiphany to me, was we would occasionally get a really terrible email from somebody. She just hates my voice. They hate what I talk about. They hate everything, Max, about the show. And my first instinct, of course, was to fire off an angry email right back at them. And my wife said to me one day, you know what? don't do that. Do the opposite. Try to engage that person in a conversation and see what happens. So he sent me an email that began with "Dear Idiot," comma. That's how his email started. So I just emailed him back and said something like, you know what, I got your email. You're clearly very passionate about this subject. Let's talk a little bit more. Here's a little bit more about what I was feeling. Let me hear what your thoughts are now. The next email I got was, I can't believe you responded. I love your show. And so it was a big lesson to me that sometimes the biggest critics are your biggest fans. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind, I think, for creative people.
Yeah, totally. I mean, yeah, people have many different reasons for firing off something, on Twitter or personal email. And often it reflects some issue that's happening in their own life that has little to do with you. But I do find that strategy of just being curious about when somebody else is upset about something, beyond my work as a public person, is interesting. It's like, what is the root cause of this thing that is making somebody feel so angry or so bothered, and just being curious about it. That's always way more interesting than going "F you,"
Yeah, I agree. In the writer's room at my company, when I was running my production company, we would almost start every creative project by asking that great question, what if? And I noticed that you also mentioned that in your book. Tell me why that's such a great, it's great fuel to start a creative idea session, isn't it? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I love, what if we did this, and I also usually preface my what if with, okay, here's the bad idea, but what if, here's the bad idea. Because the thing is, it's like bad ideas can generate really good ideas quickly.
Totally.
Too. It's like, but you need to be able to start somewhere, it's like you need to be able to have something for the next person to bounce off. It's sort of like improv. I say this in the book. It's like you want your partners to be your improv partners, and the golden rule in improv is yes and.
Right.
If you're working with somebody who doesn't yes and you, then that person isn't a creative partner that you should be working with. It needs to go, okay, well, what about yes and you need that back and forth, and I think the volume is important. The volume of ideas is important because it does allow you to get to a few that are good. But you're not gonna, if you get dead set on 2 ideas, you're selling yourself short. Your mind isn't opening up as much as it should.
And that gets back to what you were saying earlier, I think, too, Max. It has to feel like a safe space. You have to be able to be vulnerable with the other people to play what if, because as you said, here's a bad idea, and you don't want to be judged by it. You just want to throw it out into the ether, right? Because I'll tell you, in my experience, some of the biggest ideas I've ever been a part of came as a direct result of the worst idea of the day.
Totally. And so as a result, that bad idea deserves a lot of love and credit.
You wouldn't have got there. It's a stepping stone, right?
Yeah, totally.
You write in your book also, Max, that you have to be protective of your brand. Explain what you mean by that.
So in this particular instance, I'm talking about our work, our collaborations with other brands. So, I talk about this amazing experience of getting to go to the Olympics on the back of knocking at the door, and how Air Canada asked if we'd like to head on over there, and the Canadian Olympic Committee, and it felt so good. And we've done stuff over the years with different brands, and when we do it, it has to be on our own terms, because the second you get sucked into some deck from an advertising agency where it has little to do with you, they just said, we need a band or we need a musician to do this activation. And if it's not your band, it'll be another band. And I feel like it takes away the authenticity and the trust you've built with your own audience, because people come to musicians because it's sort of the opposite of a commercial branding exercise. We're a collective of people that are writing heartfelt songs and putting on original performances, and it is different than if you were a toilet paper company or something. So and there is crossover. Don't get me wrong, but so when I say we have to be protective, it's just like, if we're gonna do something, we have to respect the goodwill that we've built up over the years, and we have to be able to do it on our own terms. And I can give you a specific example. There's something happened recently to us. Is Mazda reached out and they said we want to work with you because you're a quintessential Canadian band, and we want to offer something interesting and different to Canadians. And we want to throw a concert in a garage, the garage of someone who owns a Mazda. I said, okay, that's kind of interesting. Okay. We're in the middle of a tour. Maybe if we, we're playing all these major markets. What if we went somewhere off the beaten path and we played in some small community that doesn't always get a concert? Oh, okay. We kind of like that. Okay, cool. But I want them to be Arkells fans. I don't want them to just be random people in the neighborhood because I want this to be for Arkells fans. Okay, we can do that. So we started to kind of build out this experience with Mazda. And when we went as far as when we announce it, I don't even want to mention the name Mazda. Can we just mention that we're going to play in a garage for 100 people? Okay, yeah, we can do that. And so then we ended up, picking a bunch of contest winners. We did it outside of Aurelia in this small suburban community, and it was a riot. It was so much fun. All the Arkells fans who came said, "Oh my God, I can't believe I get to see this band in a garage." Mazda got to document the entire thing, and they turned it into a commercial, and it's a legit experience. It's a real experience, but they didn't do the thing, and this is to their credit, and this is the thing where a lot of brands, I think, make a big mistake, where they didn't overdo it. They didn't say, well, can you say on stage, Mazda and Arkells are happy to present,
right.
Or can you say thanks to our friends at Mazda, but we're not going to do that. It's people are smart. People know that this will be a Mazda activation when they arrive and when they get the email that they've been chosen. And we don't have to be so heavy-handed about it. So anyway, it was a win-win in that we got to provide an amazing experience for our fans. Mazda got to document it and collaborate with a great Canadian band, as they hoped to. And we got to do something genuinely special, genuinely something that we could, hang our hat on. And I feel kudos to them. And I feel like we have been stuck in the middle of many pitches over the years where I go, well, what if we change this to that? And they go, ooh, that's not in the deck. I'm who cares about the deck? Who cares about your stupid deck? Let's have a conversation. The reason why you're working with an artist is that you're leaning on some of the artist's instincts and what makes something special and what makes a good experience. So when I say we have to be protective of our brand, is that we say no to most things, but that's not just because we're more righteous than anybody else. It's just because we want to be able to maintain the thing that makes us special. We want to do the things that make us feel special.
Which is protecting your brand at the same time. You say use your creativity to be useful. What do you mean by that?
That chapter is about my mom. My mom is a retired high school teacher. She taught at a inner city downtown high school, Central Tech in Toronto. She taught special ed department. My dad's a social worker, as I mentioned. I'm surrounded by many people in the helping professions, and I have so much respect for people in that world. It really grounds everything I do because whatever I do just seems like fun and games. And I think we have this amazing privilege of being a part of people's lives. Our songs have been first dances at people's weddings, the songs that people listen to when they're going to write their final exam, or when they're going to chemotherapy, or when they're protesting, budget cuts at the government in front of Queen's Park. It's we play the soundtrack in such a surprising way. And it's funny though, because I have a hard time accepting that our music could be that for anybody. And I'm like, us? Really? I still to this day, I'm always a little shocked when people, reach out with a story about how our music has been helpful to them in their life. And I think it's our duty, really, to be useful. Because what else are we doing in this world here if we're not looking out for each other? And I really mean that. And I know that the real heavy lifting is done by teachers and nurses and social workers and people that are civil servants. That is where the real work is being done. And if we can lend a hand in some way, we should. And I talk about one particular story is this really thoughtful social worker who worked at McMaster Children's Hospital. She was working with some parents who were going to lose their baby who had an inoperable brain tumor. And this social worker reached out and said, just on the side, saying, these parents are big fans of you. Is there any way they could come to a show and maybe bring the baby to sound check? Because they listen to Arkells, and this might be a meaningful night for them before they have to say goodbye. And they came to the show down the road in Kitchener, and we got to meet the family. We got to meet the little baby. And, every song we played that night meant something different.
Right.
All roads will lead me back to you. My heart's always yours. There's no quitting you. Like all these like love songs kind of just became about that family. And anyway, I just think about my mom because it's like because she went to work every day just trying to make a difference in the lives of kids. And so the least we can do is just try to be useful.
Last question for you. If there was one thing you wanted people to take away from your book, what do you think that would be?
I think that's a great question. I think the thing I'd like people to take away from the book is a question they have to ask themselves, which is how do you and your personality and your skill set, how do you come to enjoy the work? How do you enjoy the work? Because my whole book is an exercise in finding ways to enjoy the work. None of it has to be, none of it is inherently enjoyable. None of it is, do you know what I mean? It's like, you can be in a very combative band. Like a band can become, it's like you can hate social media. You can all the things I talk about. It is very easy and understandable if you have a real difficult relationship with. But I think in the book, I'm trying, and I'm working it out myself every day. And it's not like a set it and forget it. It is like it is an exercise in trying to find out, can I enjoy this? Can I enjoy this work? How do I enjoy this work? Because if you enjoy it, you will do more of it, and your life will be more fun.
I agree 100%.
That's what I hope people are reading between the lines a little bit. They go, can I see myself in this? And what's my version of this?